Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming to this webinar today with Steve Wymer. We're glad to have you here to celebrate First Generation Week. And just to let you know, Steve's gonna do some talking, and then we are going to open it up for questions and answers toward the end. So if you just use the Q&A at the bottom, we're in webinar format, so we can't take live questions with you speaking, but we can answer them through the Q&A. So we'll be happy to do that. So just before we get started, I want to acknowledge that Washington State University is located statewide on homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. Currently, there are 42 tribes, 35 of which are federally recognized, that share traditional homelands and waterways in what is now Washington State. Some of these are nations and confederacies that represent multiple tribes and bands. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude toward these original and current caretakers of this region. As an academic community, we acknowledge our responsibility to establish and maintain relationships with these tribes and Native peoples to support tribal sovereignty and the inclusion of their voices in teaching, research, and programming. And that is, since we are a land-grant university, we always like to start off our presentations with that acknowledgement. All right, so again, welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce Steve Wymer. We are so glad to have him here today. Growing up in a small farming town in Eastern Washington, Steve never imagined he would attend college, much less build his career in politics and business. Denied admission to WSU on his first attempt, and even on his second, Steve drove 50 miles round trip to a community college nearby to gain the required math credit, and finally was accepted to WSU in the summer of 1996. Without the basic understanding of what a communication degree was even about, Steve initially pursued a degree in education, but after a year in Pullman found his way to Murrow, a decision that would change his life. The small town kid who barely made it to WSU went on to become the only person in known history to serve 3 terms as student body president at a major university. As ASWSU President from 1998 to 2001, Steve led the process to design and construct the WSU Student Recreation Center and left his lasting mark on Pullman. After graduation in 2001, Steve spent nearly a decade in Washington, D.C. as an advisor and spokesperson to 3 United States senators and was elected by his peers as president of the U.S. Senate Press Secretaries Association. In 2011, Steve moved to Silicon Valley and to lead a communications and corporate affairs for TiVo. He went on to hold his senior executive roles at Nextdoor and eBay while establishing himself as a trusted advisor to the mayor of San Jose, California, and a variety of other elected officials. Today, Steve is an active investor in a variety of technology and venture capital business ventures, and serves as a president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Silicon Valley. Residents of San Jose, Steve and his wife, Michelle, are active in a variety of civic organizations and the proud parents of 4 young children. And I don't know what Steve does in his free time, but we're sure glad to have him here today. So Steve, we'd like to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Wendy and Anna and Matt and everyone for having me. I am incredibly grateful for my time in Pullman and to be a Murrow alum. I don't think I had a full appreciation for the experience that I was so fortunate to have in Pullman. And I think that grows over the years that you, after you leave Pullman. And so for those of you who have been somehow impacted by COVID in the last couple of years, which I think we all have been, but for those of you who it's minimized or limited your time in Pullman, in class, in person, I'm really grateful that we're sort of on the other side of that now. And I'm hopeful that you can maximize every moment possible to be in the buildings in Pullman and with your classmates and get to know each other and network and really soak up that full experience of being a Murrow student in Pullman or abroad, but just the essence of being a student there on campus was so special to me, and I will always cherish it. So I have a couple of slides if we want to flip over to those. I just wanted to share with you all today. And really the most important thing I wanted to do today is get your questions and give you some feedback just from my experiences. I use this picture. I think that's me in the red coat there going down this hill. This is my favorite thing to do when I do get some free time, sometimes even with my kids. I'm a big skier. This is in Lake Tahoe. And I showed this picture because it's sort of emblematic in some ways of my career journey, which is both awesome and I've had some really, really awesome experiences, but also at times can feel like you're about to zoom right off the mountain into the lake and have a big fiery crash. And I think that's sort of a really important piece for young people to understand as they go into their career, that you're very likely to have some really good highs and some really tough lows, and navigating those will really, really, truly define your potential and in some ways even your personal happiness and success in life. So I just want to go through really quick, share my story, and then give a few thoughts and reflections and get to know what might be on some of your mind. This is my family. I'm really blessed to have an awesome wife, Michelle. She's a partner at a lobbying firm in DC, and she runs that from here in San Jose where we live. I have a sons, Jack, Cooper, and Brooks. They're 13, 11, and 6. And then we have a daughter, Joy, who's 9. So that's my family. We can go to the next slide. I grew up in a little tiny town called Chewelah. I'm the one with the really terrible haircut there in the middle. And I had really small dreams. As I look back on it, I wanted to be a log truck driver. And Chewelah is, all of you have driven through Colfax. Maybe some of you are Eastern Washington people, but it's a town of 5 or 6 churches, 2 or 3 bars, and 1 stoplight. And so it was an amazing place to grow up, but not somewhere that really has a lot of opportunity to go back to. But I'm super grateful for it. And it gave me a tremendous foundation for life. I got to WSU in the summer of 1996, which seems like yesterday, but also seems like about 400 years ago. And something I'm really proud of, or maybe seems insane now, is that my fall class in 1996 was the first class that was issued email addresses at WSU. So I found out what email was as a freshman. I know it sounds insane to some of you guys now who are using about 8 million different ways to communicate, but it was fun. And I got very involved in student leadership. As Wendy mentioned, I was either the students at WSU were foolish enough, or I was just fortunate enough to wind up getting elected student body president, and it was a ton of fun. And my experience as a student leader really transformed my life. And I met lots of different folks that I had never interacted with before, and had really a tremendous opportunity to play a role in serving on campus. My big project was the rec center, but also just tons of other things that broadened my perspective and helped me really develop a tremendous sense of gratitude for the opportunity to be a student in WSU and a student leader as well. After that, I had some jobs in politics. I went to grad school briefly in Arizona and worked in college athletics for a little while, but ultimately found my way within a couple of years of graduation to DC, where I worked in the Senate. That's where I met my wife. That's our first son. And both of our 2 oldest boys were born out in Virginia. It was awesome to work under that building every day. And it was just, I gave a ton of different tours there and press conferences and that I'd organized for my bosses. And I really loved every minute of it. It was amazing. It was not a very good life for building a family because we worked 7 days a week, and it was very intense, but it was a tremendous training ground to put my technical writing skills that Dr. Kelly used to beat into me with the hammer at school sometimes, and just the other many lessons that I'd learned as a Murrow student in terms of managing press and media relations. When I was there, one of the really cool things that I got to experience was I was asked by the State Department to go and train in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone to make visits there to train government leaders and political leaders in media relations. And so I conducted workshops all over those countries. I think I made a total of 5 trips there over the years. And it was amazing. I learned so much. I'd never been to Africa. I'd never really been anywhere. In fact, the first and only time I'd ever been on an airplane was when I was at Washington State, and they sent me to a student body president's conference in Los Angeles. That was the first time I'd ever been on an airplane when I was 21. And so this experience when I lived in DC, to be able to go to Africa and do this was really impactful on my life, and really a neat way for me to take some of my training that I'd learned in the Senate and pass it on to those who really lacked a lot of the fundamental media relations training that you might get it even as a freshman in a basic mass comm class. So really an impactful perspective that I gained through this time, and something that I cherish to this day. And I've stayed really involved with this. I can talk a little bit more about that when I get to what I'm up to now. So I moved to Silicon Valley. This is my friend who's the mayor here. I don't know if this is just like me trying to humble brag that I'm friends with him or something, but he's just a really great guy. I was friends with him before he's mayor, but I think I use this picture just because it really is a special relationship to me, and been fun for me to help him and be a part of his career. He's leaving office this year and going to go on to do something else. And but it's been a really fun opportunity for me to serve to stay involved in politics. And I love helping elected officials, but also to do it, sort of not as a full-time job, but as more as a friend and an advisor. So I worked at TiVo, where I was and by the way, I'll get back to this when I talk about each step of the journey, but I took a job at TiVo that was so far above my head as a senior executive there. I was 30, in my early 30s, and I just learned tons. And it was a publicly traded company, so I got to learn quarterly earnings calls and script writing for annual meetings and things like that. And then I went to a venture-backed company, which was Nextdoor, which was pre-IPO, and so we were still raising funds and growing. We were launching in different countries. And it IPO'd almost a year ago. And so that was a fun thing to be a part of. And then I worked at eBay, which is a massive conglomerate, and learned a ton there and had some great ups and great downs there. And then now I work for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Silicon Valley as the CEO. So a long arc of different types of companies and different learnings along the way. And most importantly, just some fun work to do and great people to meet. Okay, so just a couple things before, and like I said, I really want to get to your Q&A, but I had some things that just struck me as I was just thinking, what would I have loved to have heard as I was an undergrad? And I think one of the things I missed as an undergrad and I probably didn't take the time to do it if it had been offered. So I can't really say, oh, I wish the Murrow school, or at the time it was a college, it was a school, the Murrow school, now it's a college. I can't even say they didn't offer it because I probably wasn't paying attention enough to seek it out. But what I think would have been valuable for me, and what I hope to be able to offer some of you, is just some reflections on how my leadership journey has taught me and what it's taught me. And as you think about that, how you might prepare yourself to really run towards things that are going to serve you well in your career and in your life, and avoid some of the things that are common pitfalls, and certainly ones that I've experienced. So I'll start with, I put down leadership superpowers. And I think it always kind of sounds sort of silly to me when someone says, hey, what's your superpower as a leader? But I think in reflecting on what I think that I'm good at, and things that I have an affirmation from others that others who know me and have worked with me and witnessed me, what they might agree that I'm good at, it helps me think about where my gaps are. And it helps me think of, then I can trace it back to even Murrow and before. How did I develop these powers, and what I don't know if powers is the right word. How did I develop these attributes? And how could I help others think through like what their attributes are and how it might serve them in their career? And so I will say these are just 4 things that jump to my mind that I've tried to develop and hone really well over my career. And the first is meaningful, trusted relationships that are rooted in loyalty. And when I say loyalty, I mean the types of relationships where you always give someone the benefit of the doubt, and the types of relationships where you're always there for them. And you're not just building a relationship to get yourself, but also one where it's a massive priority for you to give. speaking into an influencer in a trusted, impactful way, that's something that I think I learned right away in my career, because I was really blessed when I was in student leadership to make my mentor as a student was the president of the university at the time. His name was Dr. Sam Smith. I stay in touch with him to this day. He's in his 80s and he lives out in Pennsylvania. And he was just so blunt with me. And he would tell me all the time, hey, Steve, he would say, you're barking up the wrong tree on this. And it was really valuable to me. And I built a relationship with him where I probably had more credibility than I should have, in terms of just, I could have a really casual conversation with him, which was not something that I really deserved to have with him as a punk kid who didn't know much, but he was gracious to me in that. And that translated to me over the years, where I worked for 3 US senators, and then I worked for 3 CEOs. And of those 6 people, all of them were tremendously powerful and tremendously influential, much more so than of course I was. And yet I worked really hard to try to be able to give them, to have an impact on shaping their job or the project at hand, by giving them really good insight and by being able to give them feedback in a real-time way that was of value. And I think I did that through gaining their trust and through demonstrating to them how committed I was to them and the mission, and in the case of the senators, the state that they represented, and in the case of the CEO, the company and the mission that they were serving. And there's something really, really valuable to that. And I think there's something I wanted to just share with you all, to say, how you communicate with your boss, because when you come out of the Murrow school, you will undoubtedly, assuming if you don't go straight to grad school, if you enter the workforce, you will undoubtedly have a boss who likely has a boss who may have another boss who may have 3 more bosses above them. And your ability to interact with them in a way that gives them great value from your interactions, versus you being perceived as someone who exists for them to tell you what to do, is a really big leverage point for you to advance in your career. And I'll spend a little more time on that as we go on. The next thing is just an analytical ability to ID problems and offer insights. I think I'm a voracious news junkie. Every Saturday, I send out a list of articles I've read that week to friends and colleagues of mine. I just call it the weekend reads. And I'm constantly trying to consume news and information and leverage those insights to try to figure out, just basically to find pattern recognition of ways that pathways to solving problems. And that's something I've really tried to hone as a career. And then the last one is just to be really positive. I read somewhere enthusiasm is like 90% of everything. I may be exaggerating with the percentage, but the point is that I just found so much. When I ran for student body president at WSU, the vast majority of people I asked to vote for me could not have cared less about student government. And I sort of ran into that and said, yeah, student government's lame. Who cares? No one cares about it, but I do. So I'm just asking you, would you vote for me? Just because I really care about this and I want to try to build a rec center. And a lot of times people would just be like, okay, dude, I don't care about student government. I don't care. But like, if you care that much, it's not that hard. I'll vote for you. And I think that sort of approach of not trying to force them into a position where they felt like they needed to nerd out to the level I was nerding out, but just to allow my enthusiasm for what could be done with the organization to convince them to support me. So I believe firmly in enthusiasm, and I tend to like athletes that are very outgoing and enthusiastic. I tend to like business leaders who are, and I think that's one of the real attractive attributes of leaders today. And so I just encourage you to think about pursuing things and being involved in things that you can genuinely have a ton of good positive mojo about and spread, because it'll make it more fun for you. And those are the types of people that I find people really want to work with and around and for, is people who have a lot of enthusiasm. So next, leadership gaps. So here's my leadership gaps. I have an insecurity complex. Every job I've ever taken, I've thought, oh my gosh, I want that job. And then I get the job and think, I don't think I know how to do this job well. And I think all of us sort of live in a little bit of an imposter syndrome in our life when we chase something big and we're trying to achieve something and we question whether or not we really have what it takes. In fact, I find that people who don't ever have that question, they tend to be naive to the depth and breadth of complexity around them. And for me, I'm a first generation. My parents told me, hey, Steve, they never even pushed me to go to college. They just said, we love you, we support you. You can do whatever you want. We don't have any money to help you go to college, and we don't really know a lot about the system or how to go for it. So, but we love you and we're here to support you. And maybe it was coming from a small town. Maybe it was, when I got to WSU, I pledged a fraternity and they denied me. They said, like, no, we don't want you in our fraternity. I wound up in another chapter, which is like a great gift that's changed my life. I ran for positions, I think leadership positions, and I lost. And I just kept pursuing things. And I think, the imposter syndrome that I faced was always feeling like I needed to measure up and to prove value, and never slack off and never take a play off, because I had I've always yearned to be seen as somebody who had a lot to contribute. And sometimes that can be good. Sometimes it can be motivating, but I know for me that I've made decisions over my life because of just feeling insecure about whether or not you measure up in a way that weren't always the best decision. So I don't know if any of you have ever suffered from insecurity, but I can assure you, just because someone's outgoing, I can speak from experience. If you're outgoing and you talk a lot and you can yell loudly or take up a lot of oxygen in a room, it doesn't mean that you're not insecure. Sometimes you do that when you're the most insecure. So just know, if you've ever experienced that, you're definitely not alone. And I've yet to meet someone who can authentically tell me that they're always 100% confident and secure in everything they're doing, and they know that they're right about everything. Those don't tend to be everyone's favorite people to be around. And then another leadership gap I have is perspective. I'm really blessed. I think I've learned how important it is for me to expand my perspective and understand other people's worldview because of a combination of two things in my life. One, I grew up really without anything in the middle of an Indian reservation, the Colville Indian Reservation, sort of horseshoes around where I grew up. I grew up in a farming town where I thought maybe I'd be a log truck driver. I didn't have a pedigree per se. Even as I went on in my career, I had a Bachelor of Arts from Washington State, a school when I was on the East Coast. No one was even very familiar with WSU. And through all of those, even from my journey where I came from, I was so blessed to have a limited perspective. We didn't have racial diversity or even really a ton of economic diversity as a kid growing up. I went to Washington State, massive new perspective poured on me. I lived in Washington, D.C., massive new perspective poured on me. Silicon Valley, where 62% of people who live in Silicon Valley weren't born in the United States, massive new perspective. I became a father, tons of new perspective, a husband, tons of new perspective. My wife and I have a daughter with Down syndrome, tons of new perspective, tons of understanding about things that you don't understand anything about. And each time the aperture of my understanding grew, I realized how important it was for me to continue to expand that aperture. I'm a white male in a world where race and ethnicity and culture and gender and identity, sexual orientation, all of those things absolutely do play a role in access to opportunity. And the more perspective I've gained, the more I yearn to understand others' perspectives better. And it's a very hurtful thing to be misunderstood. I've experienced that in my career. I've been misunderstood. I've been fired from a job in a misunderstanding. I've hurt a friend's feelings through a misunderstanding. And I think we need to yearn to be understood and to understand others. I think it is much to what Wendy mentioned when she talked about a land-grant mission school. I think it is an obligation for us as very privileged people to have been able to attend Washington State University, and particularly the Murrow School, which is one of the finest in the country. It's an obligation of ours to try to understand those who don't have access to that tremendous privilege that we've had, and to try to expand opportunity for others. In my day job now, I serve an organization that serves 6,000 at-risk and underserved youth here in Silicon Valley. And they have every single bit the potential and the capability that my own children have, and they don't have the same access to opportunity. And all around us in the world, we can see that in the developing world. We can even see that here in the US. You see it even in the state of Washington. The average kid who grows up in Moses Lake does not have the same access to opportunity that the average kid in Bellevue who grows up in Bellevue does. And it doesn't mean every kid in Bellevue is a rich kid with tons of opportunity. It doesn't mean every kid in Moses Lake is a poor kid who can't access opportunity, but it means the environment in which they're in, it's just a fact. They don't have, I mean, just look at a basic access to broadband. It's not equal. And so I have a gap in perspective, and I think I always will, and I'll always be seeking to broaden it and expand that perspective. And I hope all of you can develop a goal in your career to note that you have a perspective gap. For no matter what your perspective is, you still lack it in some other areas. And I know I do, and I want to increase it as I get older and even hopefully have great perspective by the time I grow up. So next is deployable assets. Each of you has a deployable asset. Right now, as you're young in your career, your biggest asset is just your energy and your work ethic and your ability, your passion to get things done. But as you grow in your profession, you'll build more of a professional network. I hope you work really hard to build your network there as a student, because it's really critical. I did that at WSU. I was able to do that through student government, but some of you may be in student government, you may be in intramurals, you may be in a fraternity or a sorority, you may be in a residence hall that has a good tradition, you may be a student athlete, wherever you can build your network. You can build your network with your professors, your advisors. I got really lucky. He wasn't the dean at the time, but my advisor, my academic advisor was Dr. Pinkleton, who he was so gracious to me. He probably thought I was the biggest bozo out there, but he took time for me, and he cared about my studies and my path. And I think he was about as surprised as I was when I actually graduated. But you have a tremendous dean, and there's other professionals in the Murrow School who are awesome network for you as you experience you're blessed with the experience of being a Murrow student. Loyal friends. You know, some of my friends at WSU are my dearest friends to this day. I think I had 4 of them in my wedding. And so the importance of building those meaningful friendships is a real asset that for you in your profession down the road. I've developed a deep expertise now, almost 20 years in communications, marketing, branding, GR, strategy. But you'll get to chart your path. Maybe you'll be an on-air person. Maybe you'll be more of a technical writer. That was my degree. Maybe you'll be more on the advertising side. Maybe you'll be more on brand comms, or you'll get into audio streaming or more the technical side of comms. But whatever yours are, make sure that you feel like you're really building those as deployable assets for you in your career going forward. And then I was just really lucky to have diverse experiences, having worked in a little bit in college athletics, and then in politics, and now in tech, and now in a nonprofit. I teach my kids same as lame, and I just didn't want to be the same as everyone else. And so that diversity, if you can, it's so valuable to have different perspectives, having worked in different fields and in different areas, different towns. And then for me, the survival of negative experience. And wow, this is a very non-Murrow school error here, but I meant to write missteps, but that says misters. I didn't have any survival of negative misters, but I have survived. I'm still standing after lots of missteps. And I think those missteps have made me a smarter leader and somebody who has more to offer, whatever organization I'm involved in. And I own those. I step into those and I say, I've made that mistake, and here's what I learned from that. And I think it becomes a valuable resource to others. So, it's just a quote I love. Everybody has not to sound like the cheesy sort of guy with posters on his wall of quotes, but I definitely have those. This one is from some guy who used to be president. I'm sure you've heard of him. It says, "Let your heart feel for the afflictions and distress of everyone, and let your hand give in proportion to your purse." And I hope you're all able to do that in terms of giving back to Murrow and WSU as well. But I think it's just so important to understand others and try to give back where you can. So before I take Q&A, though, I think I don't know who's running the slides, but I think we're I'm not sure. I don't think I had any more slides, but before we get to Q&A, I just wanted to share something I read the other day in Axios, and I'm going to read it really quick. I'll be quick because I don't want to miss anything, but I also know how boring it is to watch someone read something, but I'll try to be quick. There's an article in Axios, which if you've not followed Axios, it's like in Washington, the big online digital media properties tend to be Politico and Axios. And they have really great coverage of not just sort of DC politics, but in general news. This one in Axios, the headline was "The Perpetual Pursuit of Professional Happiness." And here's some of the points made. Persistently pursue, this was advice from the editor of Axios, persistently pursue work so personally satisfying that you do it for free. That's the type of opportunity that Murrow can provide, is to do something that you do for free. We spend more than half of our adult life at work, getting to work, thinking about work, or whining about work. So hunt for deep, meaningful professional happiness that until the moment you need work simply to survive or to provide for others. Gallup released some polling on this just last week. Gallup found that only 20% of Americans say they're thriving at work. 62% are indifferent to their work, and 18% are downright miserable at work. So no wonder that Gallup found people are sadder than ever in its worldwide survey of happiness recently. Millions of Americans, including so many people I know, have little choice about their work for a variety of reasons, whether it's family obligations or you just can't get a job, or a job that pays as much as the one you're in, or what have you. But millions of young college graduates and knowledge workers have more choices than at any time in the history of the world. That is certainly true for you all. The puzzle is that so many don't act, and they get stuck in a totally unnecessary rut of their own making. So here's my tips for you. And I'm happy to send these to Wendy or to Anna or somebody, and if they're of use or interesting to all of you. 5 quick tips. 1, study yourself. Do your homework and get good grades, but study more closely what electrifies your mind and lights up your heart. These 2 signals tell you what you love. Don't listen to your parents and don't listen to your buddies. So many kids simply do what their mom or their dad did. I know so many people who said, well, my mom and dad are doctors, and they really wanted me to be a doctor. And parents guide and love you, and mine are cherish. I cherish my parents. I love them so much, but they can't impose joy on you. And your friends can add all kinds of different insights of what they think you should do, but they can't show up to work for you every day. Find meaning and learning, not money. A clear, well-worn path to indifference or misery is seeking a profession simply because it pays well. A lower-income political staffer who loves her job will learn like a vacuum cleaner, experience all kinds of things, and live a rich life of learnings and insights. They also might get rich someday. But a person pursuing just wealth may actually not achieve it, and they won't get any of those other benefits. So do that analysis in your head as you think about where you're going in your career. And the 4th one is something most career people would definitely have never said long ago, and it might not be popular to say now, which is quit until you hit. Just this is really a basic tenet. Don't work in a job that sucks. Don't work in a job you don't like. And if you set artificial obligations to stay, they call it the golden handcuffs when you work for a company that's giving you stock options that vest down the road. So you got to stay to get those. You're going to have bad days, suck it up. But if you have to have bad months, bounce. That's just life is too short to work in a job that you're miserable in. And then the 5th one is never settle unless you have no choice. We get one lap in life, so perpetually pursue jobs, bosses, colleagues, and work that bring you maximum growth, fulfillment, and happiness. Happy work alone doesn't make a happy life, but sure as heck helps when other parts of your life are sagging or sucking. And can you truly have a happy life if you have a terrible, miserable work life? So those are just thoughts that I think I really appreciated reading from Jim Vandy at Axios, and I thought they might be of value to you. And I'd love to take your questions, and I'd love to be helpful to all of you as you pursue your path in any way I can be.
All right, thank you. Yes, please feel free to share those. Those are some really great tips. We do have a couple questions here, if you're ready. So the first question is, as a first gen myself in 1990, and again as a mom of 3 kids while finishing my degree, I was raised by a mom who was a custodian at WSU in the residence halls. She always came home telling me about her favorite students that lived in the dorms that she cleaned. Did you connect with any staff at WSU that worked in the dining halls or residence halls? And did those relationships impact you personally while you were a student?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, Sarah, because I, the answer is yes, 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 and yes. One of the ladies, she's in her late 80s now. Her name's June Davidson. She was a secretary in the student union in the Cub. I met her. I trade Christmas cards with her. Her stories just totally enlightened my life. I cherish her. There's a photographer named Bob Molheck who takes pictures for everything. He's like an official WSU photographer. The guy is like he's a treasure. If you ever get a chance to go in the library into photo services and meet him, I think he's still there to this day. I met and loved so many different employees, different folks who would be in jobs you might not necessarily think is a place to look for a role model. But I loved the opportunity. And I think I would go so far as to say, and my dad always told me you could judge a person by how they treat a waitress. And I think that hit home for me because I'll never forget once when I came home from college, my dad was checking groceries at a Yolks Pack and Save in Deer Park, Washington. And I was in line waiting to see him. And I saw 4 or 5 customers in front of me go through the line and treat my dad so poorly. And they didn't know that my dad was actually a little small town minister who was just working at Yolks to pay the bills. But he's actually my dad, right? And who would sort of be condescending and rude to your dad, right? But everyone is someone's dad or someone's mom. And so it's pretty impactful for me. And I think if you think about that in terms of your opportunity in Pullman, your time there, the person who works in your dormitory, the person who works in the facilities department, a huge role model of mine is a guy named Keith Bloom, who worked in the facilities department at WSU. I got to work with him on the rec center, and he was a construction guy. I've never pursued the construction field. I've never had an opportunity to work with him professionally, but he was a great leader, and I was very impressed by him. To this day, I can remember exactly what he looks like from 1996. I can remember the way he approached his business, and it was an invaluable perspective for me. So I guess the answer to the question is yes, I did. And yes, they were very impactful. And my recommendation to you all is to actively, proactively, passionately seek those relationships out and make them known in your life and be known in the lives of people around you who you may not think of as a great sort of role model for your career, but could teach you invaluable lessons that are even more important than how to get a job in your desired field. And by the way, maybe Wendy, I can even go faster by just reading. I see another one from Dania.
Oh, you got him? Okay.
Okay.
I'll let you take it.
Okay, awesome. It says, how would you say it's best to get over the insecurity you might have because of failure? Oh, well, listen, there's probably lots of ways to do this. I'll just share with you mine. Most importantly is to own it. Most importantly is to say and speak it out loud in front of other people that just in case, even if you're the VP, even if you're the CEO, even if you're the older, more experienced person with the bigger title, it's really, really valuable to say, I don't actually know. I'd like to think about this with you all because I don't have the answer. Or to even say, I've never done this before. So let's take a break here for 2 days, and we'll come back on Thursday and we'll all try to come up with the best ideas we can. I'm going to call a couple of mentors of mine and run this by them. You do the same to you, and let's collaborate on this. But I think the biggest problem with insecurity is that the very premise of being insecure about something makes someone not acknowledge that, not admit it, not say it out loud. And I think you'll find that a lot of other people will collaborate with you naturally and come to you as a teammate, and less as a competitor. If you just say out loud, you don't know. Have just that act of confidence to say, yeah, I'm really unclear about what to do, or I'd really like to take some time to seek other feedback and input as to what the right thing to do is, because I've never done this and I'm not sure about it. That humility will serve you really, really well. And you'll find that others will get over themselves and admit that they don't necessarily have the perfect solution to every conceivable problem that comes up as well. Do you feel like an imposter syndrome is pervasive to first generation students? Sometimes, sure, yeah. But I've seen big time imposters who are totally insecure, who are a triple legacy to some fancy university. And frankly, I've been very proud. This maybe sounds, here I'm telling us to be humble, but I will say a very proud moment as a Murrow grad. I've had many Harvard, Princeton, Yale people work on my teams, and they've worked for a little old Washington State Cougar with a Bachelor of Arts. I think the first generation student, the number one takeaway we all need to have as first gens is that we have an extra obligation to help others experience opportunity. It's not to be defined by the lack of previous family engagement in higher education, because you're here, you're learning, the world is your oyster. You have a tremendous playing field ahead of you to go thrive on. And our real opportunity is to make sure we help others get on the field down the road. But if imposter syndrome is more pervasive with first gens, then I double down on all of my suggestions and recommendations to pour into others and learn from others and make new mentors in a variety of different roles. But I just personally look at it like a first gen is just, we're here, we're on the field, and it's our opportunity ahead of us. Here's one from the prestigious Dr. P is with us, from our dean himself. He says, what made you decide for ASWSU president, and what was the most important lesson in your time at ASWSU? So the first reason is, I thought when I got to WSU, I thought student government was really stupid. And I thought they were sitting around talking about Robert's Rules of Order and all these things that most students that we know are not really that interesting to most people. And so I got a job. I just needed money. I worked in the, maybe Sarah will appreciate this too. I worked in the rotunda scrubbing dishes. I also worked at WSU in the student union. It used to have a hotel. I'm not sure exactly how that all works there now, but we used to have a hotel up on the third floor, and I worked the night shift on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. So I went to class on Fridays and Wednesdays without any sleep. But I was broke, and so I needed money. So I took a job at the Daily Evergreen writing newspaper columns, which, by the way, now if I could, I could rewrite all of those, I would. I'm sure there are many of them are cringeworthy, ridiculously not insightful pieces. But one of them that I wrote was making fun of student government about something. And I was sitting at my desk in the Evergreen offices, and the student body president walked in, who I'd never met. I was just a punk freshman. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, are you Steve Wymer?" I said, "Yeah." He said, I'm Matt Kyres. I'm the student body president." And I kind of gulped like, oh man, my big mouth got me in trouble again. And he said, "I just want you to know I'm just calling BS on you." And I said, "Oh, okay, about?" And he said, you've been writing things about student government. I think it's just because you are too insecure to get involved in student government, and you think you're just taking pot shots, because I think you are a talented person, and you're just being a critic because you can't do. And he said, if you want to become one of the most renowned student leaders in the history of this school, I've got the best idea that's ever been come up with, and I'm a senior and I'm leaving, and I'll give you this idea. He's like, "You want to come up to my office and talk about it?" I was like, "No, I'm not interested." I was total imposter. And he said, "Okay, well, I'll check back with you and see if I can change your mind." He came back the next day. He asked me again if I'd come up to his office. So I did. I gave in. I went up there, and he gave me this huge Apple box full of plans for a student rec center. And he said, "This is the idea I have. WSU's behind it. The university president's behind it. I can get you appointed to a committee to work on it. But you got to run for student government, and you got to get involved, or you won't have a platform to work on this." And that's why I got involved. And it was awesome. And as you probably all know, the student rec center got built. I got to clip the ribbon right before graduation to open it in 2001. And it was all because of Matt Kyres. And I've owed him all of that, because he really pushed me, and he called BS on my insecurity. So it seems like there's pressure for that first step, internship or first job after college. I like your suggestions to quit it if it doesn't hit, and how you shared surviving missteps. Do you have specific recommendations for that first step? So it won't surprise you that I'm going to say this, but I think it's so important not to chase a logo for your first job or your first internship, because the hit rate is so low anyways. Very few people get an internship as a student or their first job, and that's like their career passion, and it's perfect, and it gives them all the trajectory they want for the rest of their career. you're going to wind up taking a circuitous path to wherever it is you're supposed to wind up. So instead of saying, I've got to get a job at DDB in Seattle, or I've got to get an internship at Amazon or Microsoft, these are my passions, or I've got to get one at Comm TV. Instead of thinking about where now because I promise you, you don't really know what it's like there. I wouldn't know if, and I've got 20 years of head start on you professionally. I wouldn't know what it's like to go get an internship at one of those companies because I haven't worked there, and every company is different. Instead of focusing on the logo, focus on your relationships and ask those people along the way. Whoever your academic advisor is, pour into that person and glean their information. Everybody you meet, professional, non-professional, somebody at your church or synagogue you go to, somebody in your fraternity, somebody in your sorority, somebody, I don't care, anybody you meet, an alumni of the school you come across at some event, pick their brain and think about where you can find people that you want to work with. That's the best way to guide your first step. You might say, I never would have thought when I was at WSU that I would go work as a political staffer. I thought I wanted to do college athletics, but I had a person who said, you should go to DC and get a job as a political staffer because you'll learn so much. And I listened to that person. And so I took it, even though that wasn't what I necessarily thought I wanted to do. I trusted a person I trusted to know what might be good for me to help me because they had more pattern recognition and laps around the sun than I did. So I just would challenge you, think less about the company you need to go to and more about a person and how much you trust a person who could guide you toward a role anywhere, any kind of role that could benefit you. What are some ways you'd recommend battling imposter syndrome? Well, in addition to the authenticity that I said, just to own it and speak it out loud, I'd say really focus on, I always tell people, do you get nervous giving public speeches? Some people get really nervous. And I always say, are you nervous when you talk about, if it's a parent, are you nervous when you talk about your child? No, because you really know that, right? You're an expert on that. One of the ways I've tried to combat imposter syndrome is to not just own what I don't know, which is a lot, but to get really savvy about the stuff that I do know. And you can't be savvy about everything. And as a college student coming in, you can't give off perspective gleaned from a 25-year career because you don't have that yet. But what are you going to pick during your time at Murrow to really become deeply wise about? What's something that you're really going to be able to know deeply? And whatever that is, that will give you a nice foundation to where not very many people want to raise their hand and say, I don't know anything about anything. That'd be crazy, right? That's not going to help you professionally. But it becomes much easier to acknowledge what you don't know and much easier to deal with your insecurity about whatever your gaps are by saying, but here's what I am focused on. This is what I did study. I had a big advantage learning from Dr. Roberta Kelly about writing. And even though I have a typo in this, which she would chuckle about in this presentation to you all, like I became a really, really good writer. And so I didn't know about business. I didn't know about even politics. I didn't know about all those other things, but I had to become a good writer. And that was a really good arrow in my quiver for me. And it was easier for me to own what I didn't know when I had something that I knew was pretty darn good. Okay, another comment. How did you handle, thanks. I'm glad you appreciated it and enjoyed it. How did you handle the early years when you couldn't financially afford the clothes, dinners, et cetera, that were necessary to network? Good question. Raw stress for less. Ever been? I went there. I bought a shirt and tie there. I bought a sport coat there. I did Goodwill shopping. I was very creative. Nowadays, you're very fortunate if you get a decent pair of jeans and a nice shirt. If you can afford one blazer at TJ Maxx or something like that, even if doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, a blazer over any kind of shirt will get you through a lot of professional networking. But listen, let me take a step back on the question and just say, I think too much is made of that for college students. I think too much is made of that. I think when I was in college, there was all these things about how to interview, how to prep for an interview, how to dress at an interview, what to say at an interview. And I'm not suggesting that you should go about a great interview for a good job with a cavalier approach and not take it seriously. You absolutely should. But even more important than one interview is your philosophical approach to whether or not you're really building trust and relationships with people you admire who are in positions of influence. Because if you can present yourself as professional and credible and somebody who's curious and has a good work ethic, and you're meeting other people, you're going to build a reputation that's going to give your aperture of what's possible for you. It's going to broaden it far beyond whether or not you can just kill one interview or not. So I would just really challenge you to think through, take a little pressure off the exact way you show up at a networking event in your clothes. But the real answer to your question was, I tried to get creative and I stitched it together without any real money to do that, through ways that were certainly less expensive than, the full suite at Nordstrom. But I think it's more important what's in your heart and how curious you are and how committed you are to others and how capable you are than it is the brand of your clothes. But I don't diminish the fact that you don't want to show up looking like a bozo. But I just say be creative and know that it doesn't have to be name brand. And anybody who's expecting that about you to hire you, you don't want to work there anyways. So.
Great. I love Ross Dress for Less, by the way.
Why not? I drove to Spokane and got one. I'm sure those ties are hideous today, but they work for my student body president stuff. That's for sure.
We do also have the Cougar Closet. I just wanted to mention that. So if anyone has any questions, that's a great resource, and folks donate a lot of very slightly or not even use professional clothing. But yeah, I agree. Just to be genuine and be yourself. But yeah, so I have a couple other questions here. What was your first job you got after you graduated?
Yeah, so I moved to Tucson, Arizona. The president at Washington State, Dr. Smith, he said to me, Steve, I think you might want to go into business or politics, but I know you also love athletics. I have a good friend of mine who used to be the athletic director here at WSU, and now he's the athletic director in Tucson. And I think you should humble yourself and go down there and be his complete errand boy and just go do whatever he wants, drive, just be his, and he'll get you into a grad classes there. And so I said, well, that's a great idea. I thought that would be just a good way to grow. I went there. By the way, it was super, super hard because I went from being student body president, where I was decently a larger fish in a small pond. I went to a town where I didn't know a single person. I was broke as a joke. I was living off of, I think I made $800 a month. I had a dumpy old Honda Accord that I would drive around, and I was an errand boy for the athletic department. And I delivered things. I handed out like promotional schedules before games, and I just worked, and I started taking a few grad classes. I realized I didn't really want to be an athletic director. I thought maybe I had wanted to, but I learned a ton, and that's where I sort of went to. I kind of liken it to, I spent that year learning to grow up and to know that that I wasn't going to be able to ride any coattails from my time and any accomplishments at WSU in a world that was bigger than Pullman. And I think that was a really, I think I matured a lot that year and just grew. And I think that experience helped me, because then I moved back to Washington and I worked in politics. And by the way, if you work as a political staffer in politics, it is a grunt job. It doesn't matter. Even when I left, I was the number 2 person in my office. I was a communications director. I had achieved a lot in terms of professional growth as a political staffer. And you would wind up carrying a senator's suitcase if necessary. And you would still be volunteering on the weekends on a campaign, pounding signs. And being a political staffer is not a glamorous job. It's one where you're behind the scenes. And so I'm glad that my first job really humbled me, because it set me up for 8 or 9, 10 years of being a political staffer, which is a humbling job, but which just completely exploded my opportunities and put me in a position to take an executive job where I made a tremendous, wonderful living at TiVo. That was where I was the youngest executive. So my fortunes sort of flipped in terms of all of a sudden I went from working tons as a political staffer, not making much, to having much better work-life balance, making 5 times the amount of money I made before, and being sort of in over my head, but also amazing opportunity, all because of that humbling first step. So my biggest recommendation to you all, when you look for what you're going to do first coming out of school, is to look where you're going to learn the most and have the most diverse experience that's going to give you the most options, because you need optionality in your learnings right now. You do not need to die unless you are certain that you'd like to be a lawyer and you're going to law school. Then you got to go to law school, and you're probably going to start out with something in the legal field. Or if you want to divert from your communications, if this is your undergrad and you're going to go study a specialty in graduate school, that will be fairly precise. But if you know that if you don't have all those answers figured out yet, which I hope most of you would acknowledge you don't have them all figured out yet, just seek the the widest potential learning that you can, and it will really pay off.
Wonderful. Well, you have illustrated here some pretty humble beginnings, and you're pretty successful now. Do you ever get a chance to go back home or run into any people that knew you when you were a struggling student, and how do they react to your success today?
It's funny, sometimes that's really great. Sometimes I've had, people that I interacted with who it's people love to see you do well, and so that's fun. Also, one time I took my wife back to a high school reunion, and all the guys who I was friends with in high school, very few of them went to college. If any, maybe 2 or 3 out of my high school class. They just came up to me and asked me what are you driving these days? What are you driving? Because in my town where I grew up, that was sort of that was the way you were affirmed, as if you had a cool truck or a cool car, which wasn't really my goal anymore in life. And so, I wouldn't be honest if I didn't tell you some of that's harder. It's harder than you think. And I think sometimes it's overlaid with racial dynamics and socioeconomic dynamics and things and cultural things that make stuff complicated. So it's not necessarily an easy path to just chart down like, oh, here's the way to make it all smooth and simple. And you go home and everybody's like, wow, I'm so amazing. You went off to college and you did all these things. Sometimes it's complicated. And so I would just say, once again, the solution I think is to be really humble about that and just be focused more on them and trying to stay connected to them. It's hard for me because I don't really have anything left in that home. My parents don't live in my little hometown that I grew up in any longer. And so I don't really have a ton of reasons to go back there, but I do have a deeply fond place in my heart for it. And I try to get back to Pullman as much as I can. I'd love to get back there more. But I think it's good. It's awesome to be really committed to thinking about how you can give back to your community where you came from. And if there's ever opportunities, I'll certainly be thinking of those and seeking those in any way I can going forward.
Well, thank you, Steve. This has been just fantastic and so great. And do you have any parting words or any little snippet of advice you'd like to give to our first gen students out there? Many have supportive families, but it still can be kind of a struggle, and questions about being a first gen student is a different experience. So any thoughts about that at all?
Yeah, I would just say, just the most important advice that anyone has ever given me in times when things were really tough and dark is that just the most important thing you can do is to just keep going. Just keep going. And don't, if there's ever noise in your life that pulls you down and makes you want to quit, if there's ever noise that that little voice on your shoulder that says you don't belong here or something, you decide that. You decide, do you belong? And I'm here to tell you, I've actually nerded out a bit and studied the very history and premise behind a land grant school. And I'm slightly familiar with the history of even Washington State. But if you are at Washington State University in the Murrow School and you feel like you don't belong, or you feel like it's a hard journey and maybe you can't do it, you are exactly why we as an institution exist. We're here for your story, and you're seen and you're known. And I've actually had the pleasure I know your dean, I know the president of the institution, I know the history of the Moral Act that founded land grant institutions, and our school and our institution and our college, we exist to provide that opportunity for people like you and people like me. And the only thing I had was commitment and dedication and grit. That was the only thing I came to WSU with, barely got there. And if you have that, you can succeed, and you will graduate, and you will chart your own path, and you will make it, and you will do it, and you get to decide that. And if it's hard and you get knocked down, just keep going. And if you get beat up, life can beat you up on the rocks, just keep going and seek more people who can help you. I know I can speak for the people at Murrow and countless people in Pullman and people affiliated with Washington State University. There are people who will help you. You just have to ask. You have to build those relationships, and you have to keep getting up every morning and pushing, because the opportunity you have is awesome, and you're very privileged to be there. And it's just there's a massive green field ahead of you. And if I can ever be helpful, I want to encourage you and just let you know that I'm just excited you're there. You're a part of the WSU story. And it'll be awesome to see what paths you trod down the road. And I'm grateful to have had a chance to share some of my thoughts with you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for being here today, Steve. We really appreciate having you. And just to let everyone know, I think Steve has offered, if you're interested in connecting with him on LinkedIn, his LinkedIn starts with CEO, I believe. There's a couple Steve Wymers out there. But if you need the link, I can, oh, there it is right there. Wonderful. And also, I think it's safe to say that Murrow alumni are really invested in giving their time, as Steve has done here today, and we're really appreciative of that. If you are a first-gen student, we do have our Murrow First program where we can set you up with a mentor that will kind of walk you through some of these types of questions throughout your experience here. And we also have a career coaching program, which is for both first and non-first gen students. So we do have a lot of support here, lots of resources at Murrow. We encourage you to reach out to student services, and we're happy that you're here. We're happy to be here to help you. So thank you.